Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
Imagine you're in the labor and delivery unit, right? The monitors are, just humming along.
Yeah, everything's quiet.
Exactly. Maternal vital signs are perfectly stable. The whole room feels completely routine. And then, in the span of just a single heartbeat,
A fetal heart rate plummets.
yes, you are suddenly plunged into this absolute life-threatening emergency.
It really is the ultimate test of a nurse's clinical judgment.
100%.
Because in those moments, there is zero room for hesitation. You don't have time to go look up a flow chart.
No, definitely not.
You have to know the pathophysiology so well that your reaction is just pure muscle memory.
Which is exactly why we are here today. So welcome to a very special edition deep dive from the Last Minute Lecture team.
We're so glad you're joining us.
Yeah. If you are listening to this, you are a nursing student preparing for the NCLEX. And our mission today is mastering Chapter 25, the Saunders Comprehensive Review.
Right. The chapter focusing squarely on problems with labor and birth.
And we're going to walk through the material in the exact order it appears in your textbook. No jumping around.
We know how overwhelming obstetrical emergencies can seem. They really can be scary.
For sure.
But there is a clear, logical pattern to how a nurse assesses, prioritizes, and intervenes to protect both maternal and fetal safety.
Right. And we'll translate those foundational concepts into real clinical reasoning. So let's just dive right in.
Let's do it.
Okay, Section 1. Premature rupture of the membranes, or PROM. This is, the spontaneous rupture of the amniotic sac before true labor actually starts.
Right.
I came up with an analogy for this. It's like the starting gun firing, but the runners are still in the locker room.
Oh, like that.
Thanks. Like the barrier is completely gone, but the actual process hasn't started.
It creates this fascinating yet dangerous clinical tension. So to assess for it, you're looking for fluid pooling in the vaginal vault, and you'll do a nitrazine test.
Wait, let me stop you there. I want to make sure we understand the why. Why do we use a nitrazine test specifically?
Well, it comes down to chemistry, really. Normal vaginal secretions are highly acidic.
Okay.
But amniotic fluid is alkaline. So a nitrazine test strip measures pH. If it turns blue, it confirms the fluid is alkaline.
Which tells you definitively that it's amniotic fluid and the sac has definitely ruptured.
Exactly. But now the sterile environment of the fetus is totally exposed to vaginal flora.
Right, the infection risk. But I have some pushback here. If the barrier is gone, why not just induce labor immediately? Get the baby out before an infection can even start.
That's a great question. But you have to balance that infection risk against fetal lung maturity.
Oh, right, because of gestational age?
Yes. If this is a preterm rupture, delivering right away might mean the baby's lungs just aren't developed enough to survive outside the uterus. It's a tightrope walk.
So the nurse's priority is basically fiercely guarding against infection while we wait?
Precisely. And there is a critical safety alert in the text here. You must avoid vaginal exams.
Because every time you do one, you risk introducing bacteria?
Exactly. You monitor maternal temperature closely, and crucially, you watch for fetal tachycardia.
Fetal tachycardia. So the baby's heart rate spikes before the mom even gets a fever.
Yes. It's a vital early sign of maternal infection. From there, you just administer antibiotics as prescribed to buy the fetus as much safe maturing time as possible.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've lost the barrier. But what happens to all that amniotic fluid when the sac ruptures? It rushes out.
Right.
And sometimes the force of that fluid sweeps the umbilical cord right down with it, which leads us to Section 2, prolapsed umbilical cord.
If you look at figure 25.1, you can visualize the problem. The cord gets displaced between the presenting part of the baby and the amnion.
Or it just protrudes completely through the cervix.
Exactly. And that compresses the cord, cutting off fetal circulation.
Right. So the listener needs to look for assessment cues, like the client feeling something coming through the vagina. Or you might actually see or palpate the cord.
And on the fetal monitor, you're going to see severe distress, specifically variable decelerations or outright bradycardia.
Let's break that down. Why variable decelerations?
Because of cord compression. When the cord is squeezed, fetal blood pressure spikes suddenly. The fetus has a vagal response to that pressure change, and its heart rate drops rapidly.
Wow, okay. So it's a direct physiological alarm bell.
Absolutely.
So if I'm a student and I realize the cord is prolapsed, my panic is going to spike. What is the very first physical move I need to make according to the clinical judgment box?
Your absolute first priority, and this is step by step in the text, is to elevate the presenting part off the cord.
So I literally push the baby back up.
Yes. You use a sterile gloved hand, insert it into the vagina, and apply direct upward finger pressure on the fetal head. You physically lift the weight off the cord.
And I assume you don't move your hand after that.
Nope. You stay right there with the client and have someone else notify the provider.
While I'm holding that pressure, we also need to use gravity to our advantage, right?
Right. Positioning is your next weapon. Extreme Trendelenburg, a modified left lateral, or a knee chest position.
Basically anything to let gravity pull the fetus up and off the pelvis.
Exactly. Then you maximize oxygenation 8 to 10 liters per minute by face mask.
Okay, got it. And for cord care, you wrap it loosely in a warm, sterile saline towel. But I need to strongly emphasize the textbook's major safety warning here.
Oh, this is a big one.
Never, ever attempt to push the cord back into the uterus.
Yes. The umbilical vessels are super sensitive. If you try to push the cord back, the physical irritation causes massive vasospasm.
Meaning the vessels will just clamp shut.
Right, completely cutting off whatever little blood flow was left.
Okay, so we never push it back. Now, speaking of compression cutting off blood flow, what if the entire heavy uterus is compressing a major vessel?
That brings us to section 3, supine hypotension or vena cava syndrome.
Honestly, this sounds like a simple physics problem to me. You have a heavy uterus resting right on a major blood vessel.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
When the client lies flat on their back, it partially occludes the vena cava and the aorta.
Which means the blood from the lower body can't easily get back to the heart.
Right, so venous return drops, cardiac output drops, and blood pressure tanks.
What does that look like when you're assessing the patient?
You'll see pallor, faintness, breathlessness, tachycardia as the heart tries to compensate, and of course fetal distress because placental perfusion drops.
But the safety intervention for this is super straightforward, right? You just shift the weight.
Exactly. Position the client on their side using a pillow or a wedge under the hip. Problem solved.
Okay, so we've talked about mechanical compression issues, but moving to section 4, preterm labor, what about when the uterine muscle itself acts up early?
Right. So this is defined as labor occurring between the 20th and 37th week of gestation.
Looking at the risk factors in the text, multifetal pregnancy, age under 18 or over 40, substance abuse, one really caught my eye, anemia.
Yeah.
Why does anemia specifically trigger preterm labor?
It's a great physiological connection. Anemia means a decreased oxygen supply in the maternal blood, right?
Right.
Well, that deprives the uterine muscle of oxygen. When the muscle gets hypoxic, it becomes irritated. And that irritation can trigger premature contractions.
That makes perfect sense. So for assessment, we look for contractions, low back pain, pelvic pressure. But what about this fetal fibronectin test?
Fetal fibronectin. Think of it as a biological protein glue that attaches the fetal sac to the uterine lining.
Okay, glue.
If you detect it in cervical secretions between 22 and 34 weeks, it means that glue is breaking down early. It's a strong predictor of preterm labor.
Wow. Okay, so if the glue is failing, our interventions have to focus on stopping the labor, hydration, treating infections, bed rest in a lateral position.
And pharmacologically, administering tupholytics to suppress contractions, plus maybe the 17P injection.
The 17-alpha-hydroxyprogesterone caparot.
Right. Progesterone naturally relaxes the smooth muscle of the uterus.
Got it. So we're trying to stop the unstoppable. But what about section 5, precipitous labor and delivery? This is when labor lasts less than 3 hours. I liken this to an unstoppable freight train.
That is the perfect way to describe it. It's rapid fire. Your nursing priorities are to ensure a precipitous delivery tray is nearby.
Because things are happening fast. You can't leave the client, right?
Never. You stay with them, keep them calm, and encourage them to pant between contractions.
Panting to keep them from pushing too early? But what if the provider isn't there yet?
The nurse has to step in. The text breaks down specific delivery maneuvers. The first is a Richen maneuver,
Which is basically applying upward pressure to the fetal chin through the perineum, right? To control the head and prevent severe vaginal laceration.
Exactly. Then, once the head is out, you use restitution to deliver the shoulders.
Restitution, so waiting for the baby's head to naturally rotate back into alignment with its shoulders.
Right. Gentle downward pressure for the anterior shoulder, then upward for the posterior.
Yes.
And then there is a critical sequence detail for clearing the airway.
Yes. You bulb suction the infant's mouth first, and then the nose.
Mouth before nose,
Bulb.
always.
I always use a quick mnemonic for this. M before N. Alphabetically, mouth before nose to clear the airway.
Because babies are obligate nose breathers. If you suction the nose first, they gasp and could aspirate all the fluid still in their mouth.
M before N. Okay, let's pivot to section 6. Dystocia. This is basically the opposite of precipitous labor. It's difficult, prolonged, or excessively painful labor.
And the text makes a huge point to contrast two types of contraction problems here, hypotonic and hypertonic.
Right. If they both cause difficult labor, how does a nurse treat them differently?
It's a crucial difference, especially for priority pharmacology. Hypotonic contractions are short and weak. The muscle isn't working hard enough.
So this is where a provider might prescribe an amniotomy to break the water or an intravenous oxytocin infusion to boost the contractions.
Exactly. You want to stimulate the uterus. But hyperconic contractions are totally different. They are painful, frequent like 6 or more in 10 minutes, and uncoordinated.
The uterus basically never rests.
Right, so oxytocin is never given here. It would be a fatal error, because it would just hyperstimulate an already overworked uterus.
So for hypertonic, the treatment focuses on pain relief and rest.
Exactly. Hypotonic needs a boost, hypertonic needs a break.
Good rule of thumb. All right, section 7 introduces an absolute nightmare scenario, anaphylactoid syndrome of pregnancy, or ASP.
Previously known as an amniotic fluid embolism. The pathophysiology here is that amniotic fluid and fetal debris escape into maternal circulation.
And it deposits directly in the pulmonary arterioles, right?
Yes. It triggers a massive anaphylactic-like immune reaction. It is an abrupt, often fatal emergency.
What are the symptoms?
Abrupt respiratory distress, chest pain, cyanosis, and severe fetal bradycardia.
The interventions are immediate life support. 100% oxygen via face mask, prep for intubation, position on the side, and push IV fluids and blood products.
The blood products are key to correct the rapid coagulation failure that happens.
Speaking of things going wrong rapidly, let's talk about section 8, fetal distress. How do we read the monitor?
You're looking for a fetal heart rate below 110 or above 160. Also, a progressive decrease in baseline variability, meconium-stained fluid, or severe variable or late decelerations.
So immediate action. If I have an oxytocin infusion running, what is the very first thing I must do?
You discontinue the oxytocin immediately.
Stop the contractions so the placenta gets blood flow.
Exactly. Then, lateral positioning, 8 to 10 liters of O2 via face mask, an IV fluid bolus, and prepare for an emergency cesarean.
But what happens when distress leads to the worst case scenario? Section 9 covers intrauterine fetal demise.
The death of a fetus after the 20th week but before birth, it's a tragedy.
The text mentions a specific secondary physical risk to the mother here, DIC or disseminated intravascular coagulation. Why does that happen?
Retaining a dead fetus for 3 to 4 weeks triggers massive coagulation abnormalities. The body releases thromboplastin, which forms microclots everywhere.
And consumes all the clotting factors, so then she bleeds out. Prolonged bleeding time, low platelets, bleeding from puncture sites.
Right. But beyond the medical interventions, the textbook heavily emphasizes holistic nursing here.
Yeah, the psychological and cultural duty of the nurse.
It's vital. You must encourage the verbalization of feelings, accept anger and hostility without taking it personally, and strictly incorporate the family's religious and cultural beliefs regarding death and birth.
It's about treating the whole patient and their family. Okay, section 10 brings us to the final 2 structural emergencies: rupture of the uterus and uterine inversion.
Tearing versus turning inside out.
How does a nurse differentiate them clinically?
Well, a rupture of the uterus is a complete or incomplete separation of the tissue, usually from a previous C-section scar or an overdistended uterus.
What are the key signs?
Contractions completely stop because the muscle tore. The abdomen becomes rigid, you lose the fetal heart rate, and the mother goes into hypovolemic shock.
And uterine inversion.
That's when the uterus completely or partly turns inside out.
The key signs for that are so specific. A physical depression in the fundal area, the interior of the uterus might be seen through the cervix, severe pain, and massive hemorrhage.
But the priority for both is the same. Treat maternal shock with IV fluids and blood products, and prep for immediate surgical intervention.
C-section or hysterectomy for a rupture, and a laparotomy or vaginal replacement for an inversion.
Exactly.
All right, so that's the content, but smoothly transitioning into the application phase, understanding the material is only half the battle.
Knowing how the NCLEX tests it is the other half.
Exactly. So for section 11, let's dive into the 8 practice questions provided in the chapter. We're going to treat this like a masterclass, focusing purely on the rationales.
Let's do it. Question 1 asks you to identify a risk factor for preterm labor.
The strategy here is finding the abnormal option. So you have a 20-year-old prima gravida, a hemoglobin of 13.5, things like that. Those are normal.
Right. But option 2 is a history of cardiac disease. That is the outlier, making it the correct answer.
Makes sense. Question 2 is select all that apply on dystocia risk factors. Applying the text, age 45, a BMI of 28, and previous fertility issues are correct.
But I want to highlight a distractor.
Yeah.
Administration of oxytocin alone is wrong.
Right, because it only causes dystocia if it leads to hyperstimulation. You can't just assume that.
Question 3 is about identifying signs of compromise.
And here, recognizing a persistent, non-reassuring fetal heart rate as the true emergency over normal labor findings, like maternal fatigue, is key.
Absolutely. Moving to question 4, about hypertonic contractions. What's the priority?
I have to admit, it's tempting to pick oxytocin or amniotomy here.
But remember our earlier lesson. Those are for hypotonic contractions. For hypertonic, the priority is pain relief and rest.
Question 5 asks you to question a prescription for prom. Connecting back to section 1, you must question a prescription for routine vaginal exams.
Because the risk of infection is so incredibly high once the sac is ruptured.
Right. Question 6 asks for the priority with dystocia.
You use Maslow's hierarchy and the ABCs here. Comfort is nice, sure, but monitoring the fetal heart rate is the absolute physiological priority.
Question 7 is tricky. Fetal distress prep. Why administer 8 to 10 liters of O2 instead of slowing the IV?
I love this rationale. In distress, you actually want to increase the IV fluid to boost maternal blood volume and perfusion, so slowing it down is wrong, making O2 the best correct answer.
Ah, okay. And finally, question 8. First action for a prolapsed cord, applying the clinical judgment box we talked about.
Right. Calling the provider is necessary, but it delays immediate treatment.
The very first action is positioning the client in Trendelenburg to shift the weight off the cord.
Exactly. You nailed it.
Awesome. So to sort of summarize the overarching theme of this entire chapter, whether it's a prolapsed cord, supine hypotension, or fetal distress, almost every emergency in labor boils down to one critical nursing concept.
Maintaining maternal cardiac output to ensure fetal perfusion and oxygenation.
Yes. Which leaves you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder on your own as you keep studying.
Think about how oxygen acts as the ultimate medication in obstetrics. Every time you see fetal distress on a monitor, visualize exactly how the oxygen travels.
Yeah, from the maternal mask, through the expanded maternal blood volume, across the placenta, and through the umbilical cord directly to that baby.
Understanding that pathway is the absolute secret to answering almost any priority question.
That's brilliant. Well, from the Last Minute Lecture team, a warm, encouraging thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you so much.
We wish you the absolute best of luck on your NCLEX journey. You've got this.